The check was folded in half inside a plain white envelope, and the janitor placed it on the courtroom table with the same unhurried, unassuming manner with which he did everything, quietly, precisely, without calling attention to himself. That was the thing about Elias Dembélé that nobody in that courtroom understood yet. The underestimating had begun the moment he walked in. 61 years old, compact, in gray work pants and a clean button-down shirt, carrying a battered leather satchel that had clearly traveled far and carried much. He looked, to everyone in that room who had already decided what he was, like a man who cleaned buildings. What he actually was would not become clear until the envelope was opened, and when it was opened, the man seated across from him, Terence Whitfield, senior branch manager of Coastal Premier Bank, 48 years old, in a suit that advertised itself, would understand, with the specific vertigo of a person whose assumptions have just been structurally demolished, that he had made an error so large and so documented that no amount of institutional polish was going to cover it. Judge Miriam Cross had seen the filing. She had read it twice. She was already watching Terence Whitfield with the calibrated patience of a woman who knows exactly when the unraveling is going to begin and is content to let it arrive at its own pace. It would arrive soon, and it would be thorough. Elias Dembélé had worked as a facilities technician, a janitor in the common usage, though his official title had been upgraded twice in 31 years, at the Harmon Building in downtown Providence. He had come to America from Senegal in 1987. He had lived carefully and worked constantly and spent 31 years turning off lights and locking doors long after everyone else had gone home, and in that time, quietly, without telling anyone, he had become the kind of man that certain people in this world become when they combine patience with discipline and time, a man of genuine, substantial, unremarked upon wealth. Before we get to the check and what it represents and what Terence Whitfield said when he saw it, and what he said is the kind of thing that defines a person permanently. If you have ever been dismissed, underestimated, or condescended to because of what you looked like or what you did for work, leave a comment below right now and tell me how it felt, because what happened to Elias Dembélé at Coastal Premier Bank is not unusual. It happens every day. What is unusual is that it happened to this particular man who had the receipts, the records, the patience, and the presence of mind to walk into a courtroom and make it matter. Subscribe and stay with me, because the moment Judge Cross opens that envelope is the moment this entire case turns inside out. The dispute had originated 6 weeks earlier. Elias had entered the Harmon Building branch of Coastal Premier Bank, a branch he had passed every working day for 2 decades, and requested an appointment with a manager to discuss transferring a substantial sum from his existing accounts at another institution and opening a private wealth management relationship. He was wearing his work clothes. He had come during his lunch break. The teller had asked him twice if he was sure he had the right department. He had confirmed that he did. He had been directed to wait. He had waited 45 minutes. He had then been seen by a junior associate, not a manager, who had asked him with the carefully maintained neutrality of institutional condescension whether he was perhaps looking for the standard checking account options because those have much lower minimums. Elias had said calmly that he was not. He had explained what he was looking for. The associate had excused himself, consulted with someone out of sight, returned, and informed Elias that the manager was unavailable and that he should perhaps call ahead to schedule an appointment for another day. Elias had scheduled an appointment. He had arrived on the correct day, at the correct time. He had been kept waiting again, 31 minutes past his scheduled slot. When Terence Whitfield finally appeared, he had extended a hand without looking up from his phone, gestured toward a chair, and opened by asking Elias whether he was there about the community savings program, because they'd been doing great outreach in the area. That's when everything changed. Because Elias Dembélé reached into his battered leather satchel and placed on the desk a document that Terence Whitfield had not been expecting and was not prepared for. A summary statement from his current private wealth institution showing a portfolio balance of $1.2 million in managed assets plus an additional $400,000 in liquid holdings across 2 accounts. He had then said, still quietly, still without raising his voice, "I would like to move these funds to your institution and establish a wealth management relationship. Is that something you are able to accommodate?" The silence in Whitfield's office, as Elias would later describe it to the court, lasted a very long time. What followed was not an apology. What followed was a stammering, insufficient institutional non-response. Something about needing to pull in additional team members, something about paperwork, something about a follow-up call that never came. The follow-up call had never come. Instead, Elias had received a letter 3 days later explaining, in the careful language of organizations that have learned to be careful, that Coastal Premier was not currently positioned to serve his particular financial profile at the branch level, and suggesting he contact a specialized regional office. An office that, when Elias called, had no record of any referral and expressed confusion about why he had been sent to them. Elias had then filed a discrimination complaint with the State Banking Regulatory Authority, citing the Civil Rights Act and Rhode Island's own public accommodation statutes. The regulatory body had reviewed his complaint, found sufficient grounds for formal action, and referred the matter to civil court. He had filed suit against Coastal Premier Bank and against Terrence Whitfield individually in his capacity as the decision-making officer of record during the encounters. He had represented himself. He had prepared his own brief. It was 47 pages and cited 19 separate legal precedents, which his attorney of record, a civil rights attorney named Jocelyn Marsh, who had agreed to serve as counsel of review after reading the brief, described as more thorough than most things that come across my desk from practicing lawyers. The courtroom was very quiet as all of this was established on the record. Terrence Whitfield sat at the defendant's table in his expensive suit and said nothing. His attorney, a man named Beckett, was doing the talking. Objections here and there, procedural deflections, the practiced minimization of someone whose client has a difficult case and knows it. Whitfield himself had the posture of a man who had walked into this room expecting the ambient authority of his institution to do what it always did, and was beginning to understand that this particular room was not susceptible to ambient authority. Then the envelope was open. Judge Cross had asked Elias to walk the court through the exhibit. He reached into the satchel. He placed the envelope on the table. He opened it, unfolded the check, and held it flat so the court could see it clearly. It was a certified check from his current financial institution, made payable to Coastal Premier Bank in the amount of $1 million. He had prepared it, he explained in his quiet, precise way, on the day after the non-follow-up, and had brought it with him today as a demonstrative exhibit, documentation of the transaction he had attempted to make and had been prevented from making, not through any failure of his own resources, but through the assumption that he had none. The courtroom went silent. Terrence Whitfield looked at the check. He looked at it the way people look at things they cannot process quickly, repeatedly, returning to it, as though a second or third examination might resolve the confusion that the first one had produced. His attorney leaned over and said something. Whitfield did not respond. A woman in the third row of the gallery pressed her hand flat against her sternum. Judge Cross set down her reading glasses. She looked at Elias with the composed, warm precision of a judge who has just watched the most important piece of evidence in a case arrive in a plain white envelope, and she looked at Terrence Whitfield with an expression that was not heated but was complete. The face of a woman who has all the information she needs and is about to use it. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the room the way voices do when they don't need to be loud. "I'd like to ask you a direct question, and I'd like a direct answer. When Mr. Dembele sat across from you in your office, what did you see?" Whitfield straightened. "A potential client, Your Honor. And yet you asked him whether he was there for the community savings program." A pause. I was attempting to assess his needs. "By assuming them," the judge said, not loudly, precisely. "Mr. Whitfield, this court has reviewed the complaint, the timeline, the recordings of both interactions, and the letter your institution sent following the second appointment. It has reviewed your internal communications, which were produced in discovery, and which include an email from you to your associate following Mr. Dembele's first visit, in which you wrote, she lifted a page, "Flag this one, doesn't fit our typical profile, redirect if he comes back." He came back. You had an appointment. You were 21 minutes late to it and opened by asking a man with $1.6 million in assets whether he was there for community outreach. She set the page down. What you saw, Mr. Whitfield, was not a potential client. What you saw was a man in work clothes, and you made every subsequent decision based on that. This court is going to take some time now to discuss what that decision cost. What followed was the kind of ruling that uses the law like a scalpel, each element precise, each finding connected to the next, the whole thing built with the patient, interlocking logic of a judge who has done the work and is not going to rush the delivery of it. Compensatory damages for the documented financial opportunity cost of the delayed portfolio transfer. Punitive damages, given the internal email and the demonstrable pattern of preemptive redirection. A formal compliance order requiring Coastal Premier to implement third-party audited bias training across all customer-facing staff at every branch. And a personal finding against Terrence Whitfield in his individual capacity, which would accompany his professional record and which Judge Cross described for the record as reflecting a failure of professional duty so thoroughly documented that no subsequent institutional reframing will be able to obscure it. She looked at Elias one final time before she closed the proceeding. She said, without additional context, as though the sentence contained everything it needed to contain, "You were always the most prepared person in every room you walked into." The room simply hadn't noticed yet. Elias Dembele nodded once. He folded the certified check, placed it back in the envelope, and returned it to the battered leather satchel with the same unhurried precision with which he had produced it. He had no plans to deposit it at Coastal Premier Bank. He chose a different institution. The relationship manager who onboarded him had previously worked in custodial services before her own career change, and Elias found in the first meeting that they had a great deal to talk about. He moved the full portfolio within 30 days. The growth over the following 2 years exceeded his projections. Terrence Whitfield was reassigned to a non-client-facing compliance role within the bank following the ruling. He resigned 6 months later. The internal email, the "flag this one, redirect if he comes back" email, was cited in a law school curriculum on implicit bias in financial services within 18 months of the verdict, used as a case study in exactly the kind of institutional failure that is simultaneously ordinary and inexcusable. Elias Dembele continued working at the Harmon Building for 2 more years before he retired. He left quietly without ceremony, which was consistent. At his retirement gathering, a small lunch organized by his colleagues, he brought food he had made himself and said very little and seemed genuinely comfortable, which everyone present agreed was consistent also. He had always been the most prepared person in the room. Now the rooms knew it too. If Elias's quiet, thorough, devastating patience did something to you, if "flag this one, redirect if he comes back" made you feel a specific kind of anger, leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you were underestimated, or a time you watched it happen to someone who deserved so much better. Like this video if you believe that dignity is not a function of what you wear to a bank appointment. Subscribe because every week we find the story where the most powerful person in the room turns out to be the one everyone else looked past, and every week we make sure that room gets a little bigger. Share this one, because Elias Dembele cleaned buildings for 31 years and built $1 million in silence and asked for nothing he wasn't owed. He was owed everything. He collected it, every cent.